Take a look at that, because if you look at what was happening in the currency world on the afternoon of the flash crash, you'll see that the euro lost about 12 American cents compared to a yen, and that's a big dip. It looks to me like the flash crash had something to do with a program trading, high-frequency trading attack on the euro that somehow boomeranged. In other words, they found that they were successfully driving down the euro, but it was also destroying the New York stock market, so they had to pull back as this thing exploded in their face. So now it's essentially the blitzkrieg by the Anglo-Americans has failed, and there's really for the last 3 months everything has been drifting sideways. There's a possibility that it may now be the pound and the dollar that go down, and the euro survives. There's certain strength in the euro that has been displayed over the last 10 weeks. But it's also possible that the yen will be the big winner. We may wake up one morning and find that the yen and the Chinese renminbi are standing, and that the dollar and the euro have been locked in this conflict, and they both go down together, probably together with the pound. Anyway, apart from the details, this is the kind of situation that drives a financier ruling class absolutely berserk. They go bonkers, they freak out, they go into these flight forward things. And the idea is, of course, if you can start a war in the Middle East, you can get the Iranians to block the Straits of Hormuz and the Gulf, and at that point, the price of oil goes to $300 or $500 a barrel or even higher. And at that point, the problem of the dollar for the moment is solved, because there's huge demand for dollars. If you multiply the price of oil by 5 or 10, then you've multiplied demand for dollars by 5 or 10, as long as the dollar is the posted price currency for oil, which it still is. So that's a really big thing. The other things we've got going are the coming of Petraeus and the increased power of the neocons. There's a big freakout in the U.S.-British diplomatic circles about what you just mentioned, that Brazil and Turkey attempted to mediate the crisis. There's also the fact that the weaponry that's being accumulated by Iran, by Syria, by Hezbollah, and maybe even by Hamas is also building up. So a conjuncture of 5 or 10 different things coming together. So we now have to say that there is a very acute danger. And I would point to this statement about 2 weeks ago from Fidel Castro, right, the dictator of Cuba. He's really the head of state. He's the comandante en jefe. He's not officially the head of state, but really he is. He runs Cuba, even if it's from his sickbed. So he called an emergency session of the Cuban parliament and said, we're facing a situation of imminent nuclear war. Now, some people would say, well, he's crazy or he's a communist, but you have to think about the resources that he brings to the table. He has an intelligence agency, right? It's the DGI, the Dirección General de Informaciones, and they have spies. We just had a guy in the State Department and his wife who was put away, I think, for life after spending decades and decades spying for Cuba. So Castro draws on internal knowledge of the
But you don't even need that. They've turned the propaganda back on and are testing the public, market testing, for the attack, saying they've got to do it, and they've been building up the military forces, and now he comes out and talks about a criminal global government and endorses a book saying it's a eugenics empire that controls the planet. This is amazing.
Yeah, and remember, what goes on in public, in other words, when you get a member of the Likud who visits the United States and pops off in some warmonger, bellicose vein, that may just be propaganda. That just may be an attempt to, to keep support going and to keep the Middle East conflict in the public eye and all that. But again, I think Castro is basing this on things that are from behind the scenes, not just propaganda, not just war, not just the attempt to blackmail people with threats of war, but real war preparations. Now, just in the past weekend, people may be disoriented because Hillary Clinton came out and announced that we've got the resumption for the first time in 9 years of the direct talks between the Israelis and the Palestinian Authority of Abu Abbas, Abu Mazen. But of course, this is probably the weakest attempt at negotiations we've ever seen.
Well, they always try a negotiation before a new war to say, see, we tried.
Quite possibly. And the thing is, the Israelis did a tank thrust into Gaza this past weekend. So it's very strange combination.
And they also sent fighter aircraft into Lebanon and other areas over the weekend.
Right. So this doesn't look like it's very serious. And if Netanyahu says he's going to start building settlements again, and if he does, then these talks will come to a very quick end. Now, on the Iranian side, we've had all sorts of things, right? They had a photo op where they displayed all these graves in the desert saying, here, Americans, Israelis, these are the graves for your soldiers.
They're now showing these attack drones, the ambassador of death.
Right, the messenger of death. That's the other one. This can carry 500 pounds of warhead for a 650-mile range. Now, that would necessarily have to operate from southern Lebanon, from Syria, or from someplace else if the target were going.
What is the message that they've put the messenger of death in Lebanon?
They may well be, because what they've put there for sure are these M600 short-range ballistic missiles with guidance systems, which actually can be used to target specific military targets. So no longer counter value for Hezbollah, no longer terror attacks on Israeli cities, but now counter force attacks on the air bases where the Israeli Air Force operates inside Israel. That is very, very scary. That's the kind of thing that pushes the situation towards this desperation. Now, the Bushehr reactor, this has gotten a lot of attention. This is a reactor, interestingly, that was begun about 30 years ago. It was actually begun before Ayatollah Khomeini took over Iran. And when Ayatollah Khomeini came in, he shut down the entire nuclear program of Iran. They would have had, without Khomeini, they would have had 10 or 15 functioning nuclear reactors, plenty of nuclear power. This whole thing would be a non-issue. But Khomeini, who was, of course, favored by Carter and Brzezinski, right, as their Islamic card against the Soviets, as it turned out to be, Khomeini insisted on shutting down all this stuff. So now we've got the Bushehr reactor, started, I think, by the German firm Siemens back in the very late 70s, finally coming online, this time with Russian technology and Russian technicians. We had Bolton, the former UN ambassador of the neocons, right, of the Bush regime, the younger, saying that if you want to attack, you've got to do that now in the next, when he said it, 7 or 8 days, it would basically be now in the next day or two, but before the end of August in any case, because otherwise you're going to spread nuclear waste and nuclear debris. The problem with that argument is it's absurd, because if you're talking about bombing the Iranian nuclear program, you're always going to be spreading nuclear debris, right? Any attack on any nuclear facility, be it centrifuges or uranium enrichment or whatever it is, that's going to spread radioactive debris. So there really is no basis to say, even from these guys' points of view, that it has to be done now. So what Bolton was trying to do was to get a new wave of hysteria and perhaps even act as a cover for an attack, but that may not happen. But his deadline was always a fake deadline. The deadlines go on and on. It doesn't change. So we then got this military situation, and I think if you look back to the Lebanon war of 4 years ago, remember that the Israelis fared very, very badly in that war because they were confronting, in those days, Hezbollah armed with some fairly modern Soviet bloc and Russian equipment, it was sufficient to destroy the vaunted Merkava tank that the Israelis had built up and were parading as an invincible war machine. That certainly didn't happen. And now, this time around, you'd have to say Hezbollah has actually increased its armament with the help of Iran and with the help of Syria. They have got, in addition to these old-fashioned World War II-style rockets, the Grad or the Katyushka or whatever they are, they've also got these handheld anti-aircraft missiles, right? The Grail, the Gremlin, and the Grouse. These are like the U.S. Stinger. They can be used to shoot down airplanes and helicopters, flying at fairly low level.
Well, Webster, so the odds are being evened up here. But I have the question, geopolitically from your research of the region, if Israel actually went and did real peace talks, would Iran ever stop arming Hezbollah and Hamas? Would they ever pull out of Gaza and other areas? Because if you look at it, it just means which side do you take? Israel wants to knock out Iran. Iran wants to knock them out. And so from the Israeli perspective, do they have any choice? Because I'm against these wars, against World War III. I don't like what Israel's doing. I'm against it. But, I mean, what is Israel's choice then? If they back down, is there any chance the Arabs will back down?
I think the choice is a regional peace conference involving all states in the region and also certain non-state actors like Hezbollah or Hamas or others that act as a strategic force. You mentioned this article in the Atlantic Monthly by Jeffrey Goldberg, right? This the idea that the Israeli attack on Iran is inevitable because Iran poses this existential life or death threat to Iran. I would call your attention to an article by Trita Parsi. He's a scholar in the field, and his finding is that the Israeli leaders really don't believe that themselves, but that this is a rhetorical stance that they've decided to take from the moment that Obama came into the White House.
All right, stay there. Let's talk about it when we come back. Webster Tarpley. But finishing up with Webster, you were getting into Jeffrey Goldberg, the Israeli asset, and he's been all over NPR, you name it, promoting. It's sad, but it's a foregone conclusion. We've got to do it because they're going to nuke us if we don't, and Israel's going to do it. But you're saying that that's just talk. What's behind that?
I think it's propaganda. It's the kind of talk that can lead to tragic consequences. You have this guy, Trita Parsi, who is a fairly mainline academic. He's obviously of Iranian background. So he essentially has assembled a book about secret negotiations among Iran, Israel, the United States. And he points to the fact that Ehud Barak, the current defense minister of Israel, tells the Israeli newspaper Yedioth Ahronoth, September 2009, so less than a year ago, quote, "I am not among those who believe that Iran is an existential issue for Israel." Then we have the foreign minister of Israel in the previous government, Tzipi Livni, argues, according to Haaretz, in private that a nuclear Iran is not an existential threat to Israel. This guy himself, Trita Parsi, says he talked to the former head of the Mossad, Ephraim Halevi, and Halevi says the idea that Iran can destroy Israel creates the dangerous impression, the false impression, that Israel is helpless and vulnerable. And Halevi said something like that in public. So I think there's actually a greater strategic sobriety, awareness of the realities in the Israeli leadership than what they're putting on. And I think it is in some ways the desire to goad the United States into some aggressive actions by using this
and to goad Iran into more aggressive rhetoric.
Right, on the side of Iran, let me just point to one thing. So far, we don't have any evidence that there's an Iranian nuclear program. We're still operating under the NIE of December 2007. Now, all the neocons are saying that's because of this guy, Amiri. This is the famous Amiri, who was all over the Internet, and now he went back to Iran. He was a double agent. He lied to us, and that's why we came to the wrong conclusion almost 3 years ago. There's no proof. And we have Flint Leverett, one of the best experts on Iran. He was in the Bush NSC with his wife. He also says there's no evidence of an Iranian nuclear program.
Well, Webster, we know that CIA report was based on the UN inspectors and others, not on that so-called defector. But we got about 2-3 minutes left.
Just one last thing is this John Mearsheimer, right, the professor of political science at the University of Chicago, who says if he had to give advice to Ahmadinejad, he would acquire a nuclear deterrent. Deterrent means deterrent. It's not a first strike force. It would be a modest nuclear deterrent that would simply guarantee that nobody's going to...
No, I understand. Israel has hundreds of nukes and...
Certainly. And, of course, Pakistan has hundreds of, at least a significant number. Pakistan is actually an example of a country that the U.S. might like to attack but does not attack because they do have nuclear weapons. So... there's a lot of fakery, but the answer to this would be a regional peace conference. The Israelis feel threatened. Yeah, fine. The Iranians feel more threatened. So go to the table.
Webster, we're out of time, and I had one more question. What do you think of Hamid Gul, former head of Pakistani intelligence? He came on this show and said that the West is staging events to stir up the Muslims in Central Asia as a pretext to expand war.
Absolutely. absolutely. I would anything coming from him, I would take very seriously. He's obviously been widely demonized, but I don't think there's too much basis for that. So.